Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. As we all know, Doctor Who is all about space and time travel, allowing the main character to gallivant around the universe throughout its history and get up to all kinds of hijinks. But time travel is naturally a tricky thing to navigate, because of its paradoxes and other assorted risks. The Series 1 episode Father's Day introduces us to one of the most interesting of these risks, with the terrifying Reapers, who are entities living within the time vortex itself and feast upon paradoxes. The Reapers have always been one of my personal favourite Doctor Who villains, but what actually are they and why haven't they appeared more often? Well, that's what I'll be talking about on today's Doctor Who Series 1 lore video. Beware spoilers for the stories on screen now, and get ready, because this is everything you need to know about the Reapers. No, not the ones from Mass Effect. Get in the church! But before we talk about the Reapers, I think it's really important to understand what the time vortex actually is. Despite appearing often, especially in modern title sequences, the show has rarely ever delved into what it is or how it works. It's just kind of there and always makes a good visual, but expanded media has really fleshed it out and added a lot more dimensions to it, almost literally. The novelization of The Chase describes it as existing outside of any normal frame of reference. To quote the book, within it, light, darkness, matter and energy all blend, divide, shift and change. It underlines the whole of creation, touching the normal universe only slightly. Its pathways are twisted, unstable and hard to follow. A really interesting aspect of the vortex is that it seems to have an actual set geography, it's not just random pathways. The book The Crystal Bucephalus suggests that there are surfaces, oceans and a substrate that all make up the physical structure of the vortex, which paints a very different picture to what we usually see in the show now. According to the audio Neverland, there are specific entrances to the time vortex that could be completely blocked off to prevent access, and on the perimeter of the vortex exists something known as a time spiral, which is a mysterious phenomenon so powerful it can rip apart an entire TARDIS and its passengers if they happen to come too close to it. We don't know a whole lot of details about these time spirals, but there also seems to be one at the so-called vortex core, which I can only assume is, like the center of the time vortex. So there are clearly serious obstacles and phenomena that exist within the time vortex, making travel even more difficult than the Doctor makes it seem. Naturally, the vortex has always been closely related to the Time Lords, allowing them to control time itself. A good man goes to what suggests that millions of years of exposure to the vortex is part of the process allowing Gallifreyans to become Time Lords thanks to the untempered schism, a gap in the fabric of reality and a natural entrance to the vortex as a whole. According to myths and legends, Omega was the first Time Lord to ever enter the time vortex, and Rassilon later anchored the vortex, allowing the Time Lords to conquer time travel and establish themselves as an empire. Other species like the Daleks could also use it, but the Time Lords were by far the most proficient and effective at navigating the vortex. Without the right equipment or the proper precautions, it's almost impossible to survive travelling through the time vortex. Like we see in Enemy of the World and Utopia, humans die from even a short amount of exposure to the vortex. But that doesn't make it completely inhospitable. There are still plenty of entities that live within the vortex despite all of its dangers and hazards. You have lesser species like the time vortex leeches, which are cute little critters latching onto the engines of space-time vessels. There are also time roaches, nesting creatures that feed on radiation leaks, and lastly there are the insectoid Pantophagon, who can devour entire metal cities and swarms. These three species are more opportunistic and not hugely sentient, they just kind of take advantage of the ships using the vortex itself, although we don't really know how they came to exist to begin with. However, more prominent native entities include the Vortisaurs, who are huge pterodactyl-like creatures introduced in Storm Warning. They're also a bit of a scavenger race drawn once again to the radiation of travellers, but there's a little bit more depth to them because the Time Lords themselves rode these birds of prey, like the 8th Doctor does in No More Lies. On a higher level of sentience are the terrifying Vortex Rays, which I mean, just come on, just look at the name, that's terrifying. These are drawn to disastrous events to make them worse, but we don't really know a huge amount of them. However, the Time Lords outright feared these creatures and built specific defences into their TARDISes so as to not be noticed by the Wraiths. So it's interesting that there are entities in there that even the Time Lords find threatening, and by far one of the most threatening of these are the Ravenous, who were originally the peaceful Kolstani living on the planet Kolstan in the vortex itself. You might call it an impossible planet. However, when Rassilon attacked them, they began to feel nothing but hunger, becoming the Ravenous. These absolutely horrifying horrifying clown-like monsters evolved specifically to feed on regeneration, making them the natural predators of the Time Lords, and they hunted them during the old times, only for different incarnations of the Master to eventually defeat them in the present and restore the Kolstani to life, although their planet remained destroyed. They didn't exactly get compensation for that. The Time Vortex was also home to chronivores and other transcendental beings like the Eternals and the Guardians of Time, all of whom were like gods to the majority of the universe. They all had immense power and could influence the very laws of time and space with ease, but they're a story for another time. This brings us back to the Reapers, who are another species native to the Time Vortex and are linked to time itself. These gargoyle-like creatures also reside in the Morass, an alternate dimension vortex thing where time and space have been torn apart, but their main presence is in the main universe, where they seek out disturbances in time as we see in Father's Day. The Reapers are very powerful entities, able to completely devour anything in their path and even deactivate TARDISes. It's almost impossible to harm them, but they can be blocked by physical objects like churches. As shown in Father's Day, the only real way to fight back against the Reapers is to repair the damage to the timeline that allowed them in to begin with, like when Pete Tyler dies and maintains the original timeline of events. However, this wasn't the Doctor's first or last battle against the Reapers. The short story Toil and Trouble sees the 4th Doctor using them to defeat the Carrionites, and the 4 Doctors comic story sees the 10th, 11th and 12th Doctors accidentally summoning the Reapers to Paris in 1923, with the monsters chasing the 11th Doctor specifically, even breaking into the 12th Doctor's TARDIS as they chase him. However, the 3 incarnations were able to trick the Reapers while they were inside the TARDIS, and as far as I can tell, that's like their last appearance. Apart from these stories, the Reapers have barely returned in Doctor Who media despite their fascinating vulture-like setup, as they constantly lurk, waiting for paradoxes to feast upon. And since Doctor Who is full of paradoxes, it really begs the question of why they have barely featured since their introduction in Father's Day. So, as mentioned in Father's Day, the Reapers were usually kept in check by the Time Lords before, they all got blown up in the Time War. They were usually the ones preventing these exact kind of paradox. But after the Time Lords were wiped out, they couldn't hold back the Reapers anymore, which is why they appear in that episode and not earlier. However, a big thing people seem to overlook is that they're tied to fixed points and something known as the Blinovitch limitation effect. This is a theory in the Doctor Who universe created by the Russian physicist Aaron Blinovitch in 1928, and it regards crossing over into your own timeline and interacting with the past or future version of yourself, thus causing a paradox breaking the first law of time. Of course, there are some exceptions like the Brigadier and Maud when Undead and any multi-Doctor story, because in these instances the younger version simply forgets the events and only gains the memories when they experience it again as their older self. It doesn't damage time. However, the issues arise when it comes to intentionally meddling with your own timeline. It's the reason a Doctor can't simply go back in time to save people or fix plans that have gone wrong, since he'd be changing the established sequence of events that caused him to travel back to begin with. Before the Flood has a great example of this, with the Doctor accidentally crossing his own timeline and having to stop Bennett warning O'Donnell of her death, because that, yes, would cause the Reapers to appear, since O'Donnell's death is part of the events that sent them back to begin with. Indeed, Father's Day is an example of what would happen if the Doctor or Bennett interfered in their own timeline. Rose crosses her own timeline to save her dad, breaking that exact sequence of events that put her to begin with. Think of it as like a double stabbing. The first wound is Rose being seen by a past self, and the second is her actively saving her dad. Pete still being alive means Rose would never go back to see him, and therefore never go back a second time to save him. It's hard to explain because it's all timey-wimey, but it's the exact kind of paradox the Reapers prey on, because they exist to take advantage of these wounds in time. It's the same reason they're able to appear in the church after Rose accidentally holds her younger self, because the Blinovitch limitation effect creates another wound in time, like being stabbed again in your original wound as it's being stitched back up. Pete's death restores the timeline and stitches everything back up, ironically making the Reapers themselves a paradox and erasing them, which is why they're defeated at the end of the episode, restoring all of their victims because they couldn't have died in the first place. But what does this mean for episodes like The Waters of Mars and The Wedding of River Song, where fixed points are changed and the Reapers don't appear? Well, fixed points in general are really complicated and confusing, but in a general sense they're moments in time that have to happen, because they're important or relevant events in the structure of history and time itself. They're moments that fundamentally cannot be changed because it would unravel time itself. As we see in episodes like the fires of Pompeii, the Doctor cannot prevent the volcano from erupting because it is a fixed point. He can save a few people like he does with Caecilius and his family, but he can't significantly affect the events because they're set in stone. Pete Tyler's death is implied to be a fixed point in time, which makes sense considering how Rose's life turned out. So how are the Waters of Mars and Wedding of Riversong different, considering fixed points in time are also messed with there, but don't attract the Reapers? Well, in the case of Waters of Mars, the timeline only slightly changes. In the original events, the whole crew dies on Bowie Base 1, inspiring Adelaide Brooke's descendants to lead humanity into the stars. However, when the Doctor saves her, this future remains intact because Adelaide maintains her fixed death, and it simply bends the fixed point rather than outright breaking it. It's Adelaide who prevents the Reapers manifesting in that episode because, the fabric of time doesn't outright break. The Wedding of Riversong is slightly different because Riversong does break time by refusing to kill the Doctor at Lake Silencio, causing all of reality to start collapsing. I think the main reason the Reapers don't appear here is simply by chance. Meddling with history creates a wound, but not every wound becomes infected. The events of Father's Day were incredibly rare and specific. It was such an unlikely scenario that messed with time so fundamentally, and the Reapers happened to appear. Wedding of Riversong doesn't involve River crossing her own timeline, and the fixed point isn't the Doctor being dead, it's that the universe thinks he's dead. So the chances of the Reapers appearing become a lot lower. The Reapers aren't incredibly smart, they don't actively know about paradoxes or wounds to infect. They're opportunistic and instinctual, only hopping in when they happen to find a paradox. There's no specific lore reason that they don't appear in Wedding of Riversong or other episodes, it's all just headcanon from fans and speculation. But it does make sense that they simply don't appear for every paradox, because that's not how they work. They're not all-knowing, they're just like vultures. Hell, you could probably even argue that the events of Wedding of Riversong are too disruptive for even the Reapers. They might not even want to, touch an event so chaotic and sensitive because it might be too much for them. The Reapers are endlessly fascinating with such an interesting setup as we see in Father's Day. Their design is terrifying and instantly memorable, and they served as a good way to show the effects of change in time itself. However, they're not a sustainable villain, because by most logic, they should be appearing in basically every episode ever, due to how much time is being changed and manipulated throughout the show. Rose saving her dad was a huge breach in the fabric of time, because there were so many paradoxes all at once, a very specific sequence of events with far-reaching consequences. The Reapers happen to be in the right place at the right time to take advantage, so there's nothing saying that they should appear more than they have. Most of the native species in the time vortex are opportunistic creatures, and the Reapers are no different. They're a monster that's really hard to properly flesh out even in expanded media, which is probably the main reason they haven't been explored more thoroughly. Despite first appearing 18 years ago. Yeah, I know, feel old now? They kind of break the show itself and all of its rules, so I personally like that they're a unique monster to the episode. But anyway, I've probably talked in circles and confused you all by this point, so I'll end it here. Either way, I hope you've learned something new about the Reapers and the Time Vortex. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron, Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons, Matthew Burns and Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons, Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.